What's up, guys? The Comics Kid 2099. I wanted to talk to you about a graphic novel that I read kind of recently, Captain America, Castaway in Dimension Z. And as far as I know, this storyline in the single issues actually ran about 10 issues or so, but this book that I read is only the first 5 issues of Rick Remender's run on Captain America, which started right around the time when Avengers vs. X-Men ended, I think. And the artist on this run is John Romita Jr., and the inker is Klaus Janson. It's either Klaus or Klaus. I don't know how to say his name, but he's probably the most well-known for doing inks on either inks or inks and pencils on The Dark Knight Returns, but that's probably his big claim to fame. And so when I saw his name here, I was kind of like, oh wow, there's a lot of big A-listers here. And like I said, this is the first 5 issues of Rick Remender's run, so it's only the first half of this storyline. So if you're wanting a complete story about Captain America stranded in this alternate reality, you're not going to get that. You're only getting part of the story. The good news is, it's a pretty good story. I really didn't know what to expect going into this. I knew a few of the plot details, but I really enjoyed myself. This kind of reminded me a lot of Jack Kirby's Fourth World stuff from DC Comics in the 1970s, and in the back there's a little afterword, if you will, that was printed in one of the letters pages of the single issues, and it's written by Rick Remender, and he talks about how he was really inspired by Jack Kirby's 1970s output, but he specifically mentions Kirby's run on Captain America from the 70s. But I was getting more of a Fourth World vibe, but either way, it's very clear that there is a Kirby influence going on here. So if you're a huge fan of Jack Kirby, like I am, then you're probably going to want to seek this out, because I really liked it for that Kirby vibe that was going on here. I've never read Ed Brubaker's run on Captain America. I've never read any of it. And so a lot of people I know, when it was first announced that Rick Remender would be taking over the book, a lot of people were very hesitant about, is this going to be as good as Ed Brubaker's run? And Rick Remender even addresses that in this afterword. He says, listen, Ed Brubaker was doing his own thing. He was doing the espionage stuff. He was doing kind of a Tom Clancy thing with Captain America. And he says, I'm not doing that. I'm doing this very bombastic, colorful science fiction stuff. And as he says, he goes in the other direction to get out of Ed Brubaker's shadow. And I feel like that was a very good, very smart decision to go with, so that he could kind of establish his own tone and his own feel for the book. And I really feel like that was a good idea. Even though I've never read Brubaker's stuff, I feel like that, in theory, is the best way to try and get away from a very well-known tone, a well-known run on the book. Before this came out, a lot of people were saying that Brubaker's early Captain America stuff was the best the title had ever been. I don't know if people are still saying that. It's been a while since I've heard anyone say anything like that, but I feel like this was a really good way to get away from that style of the book. As far as any negative complaints I have, I don't really have a lot. Most of the issues here have a flashback to when Steve was maybe 12 or 13 years old, and a few of these flashbacks I feel like are okay. They kind of hammer home the theme of that issue, whatever the theme is for any given issue here. But I really didn't need every issue here to have a flashback. I think there's maybe one issue in this book that doesn't have a flashback. I really did not need every single issue here to have a flashback to the late 20s, early 30s when Steve Rogers was, trying to survive on the tough streets of New York. And I do like that vibe of showing kind of a tough streets of New York aspect. I don't really know how else to describe it. It kind of reminds me of some of the comics from the early 40s, like the Newsboy Legion, or some of those other comics. There's 2 or 3 different series from the early 40s that are about a group of kids, a gang of kids. They're good guys. They're not an evil gang, but like a gang of kids. And Jack Kirby even worked on some of those, like the Newsboy Legion, and whatever the name of that group was that was eventually folded into the Cadmus stuff in the 1970s and 90s. That group, I cannot remember their name right now for the life of me, but this kind of has that vibe going on, and that's really interesting to kind of set that against this 1970s Jack Kirby stuff that's very far out there, very science fiction-y, very fantastical, and then you've got the tough streets of New York where the Great Depression is going on. And those are 2 huge polar extremes going on, but I feel like Remender makes them work very well because there's a thematic consistency with each issue. Whatever's going on in the tough streets of New York is kind of paralleling whatever's going on with Captain America in Dimension Z. My only problem was I really didn't need every single issue here to have a flashback to what was going on in Steve's childhood, but it was well done anyway. That's about all I have to say. I really enjoyed this, and I'm not a Captain America fan. Most of the time, when I see Captain America show up in another comic book, like an Avengers story, or for the past 5 years or so, X-Men stories, every time he shows up, I always have this huge disdain for the character. But here, I really enjoyed him. I really liked the character. I found him to be very likable. He's between a rock and a hard place throughout most of this run, which I feel like is what makes me like him, because a lot of times the reason I don't like him is that he's complaining about the actions that someone else took, and the actions that that person took are the actions of someone who is in between a rock and a hard place, and I feel like, well, before reading this, I always felt like Captain America was never really in that place. But here, he doesn't have it easy. He's got it pretty rough in this Dimension Z, and so I really feel like that added to my enjoyment of this book, and it made me like the character a lot more than I did before. I'm probably not going to become a huge Captain America reader because of this book. I'm not going to go out and read all the other runs of Captain America that are out there, but this did make me interested enough to read Volume 2 of Remender's run, and however far he goes. I know eventually, spoiler, I know eventually Captain America does make it back to Earth. I don't know if I want to read this series after he gets back to Earth, unless he can find some way, Remender can find some way to really maintain that 1970s sci-fi kind of vibe that he's got going on here. Unless he can do that, I really don't feel like there would be any reason for me to keep reading this series. But I really like this volume, and I do want to seek out Volume 2. So that's my thoughts on Captain America Castaway from Castaway in Dimension Z. What did you guys think of this book if you've read it? Did you like it? If you did, let me know what you liked about it in the comments below. And if you liked this video, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And I will be back later with another kind of video. Take care.